The research shows that if you have two supportive friends, and I would include a spouse, assuming that they're supportive, your health is dramatically better. So two people you feel like you can really share literally anything with.
Welcome to the Optimum Human Podcast, the show that interviews the world's top experts in fitness, nutrition, mindset, and beyond. Let's get into the show.
Hey guys, this episode of the Optimum Human Podcast is brought to you by the Savvy Girl's Guide to Organic Beauty. Truth is, lots of women think they're well informed about personal care products, but they haven't invested the time to truly learn about the toxic ingredients in the products they use every day. The Savvy Girl's Guide to Organic Beauty is a value-packed online course that teaches you how to detox your beauty and personal care routine and look younger without toxic chemicals. This program is brought to you by our guest from the Optimum Human Podcast episode number 38, Kelly Bonanno. If you want a sneak peek into what will be taught in the course, check out episode 38, or you can check out Kelly's free 5-day challenge, 5 days to a clean, green beauty routine. Wow, that's a mouthful. This course offers an easy way to get the toxic junk out of your home and away from you and your kids. You'll learn anti-aging tips that will help you to look and feel younger, how to keep your family safe from harmful toxins, easy actionable tips that will improve your health, how safe the products you and your kids currently use are, wellness secrets that mainstream doctors don't share, how to reduce your body's toxic burden, and which products and brands are truly safe and effective. So you can check the show notes at www.theoptimumhuman.com for all the links to find Kelly's free 5-day challenge or to register for the Savvy Girl's Guide to Organic Beauty. We use many of the products Kelly recommends in her program, so we can genuinely recommend her knowledge and the products she recommends, so you know they are good. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Brian and Claude Show, also known
Broad Show.
Yes, also known as the Optimum Human Podcast. Hey, we just got the one. We didn't do that awkward two. Optimum Human Podcast.
Yeah,
crap. Dang it. All right. God, these intros are so awkward.
No, they're fun. They're fun. I like watching you use English. It's amusing.
Fair enough. So anyways, enough about us. We've got yet another amazing guest today, Dr. Jessica Drummond. Jessica, how are you this morning?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Glad to have you on. And Claude, sir, how are you?
I'm doing well. The internet is still up, so society is still functioning. So no, it's good.
Yeah, we can go on a whole tangent there, and we'll just leave that one alone.
That's right. All right. Good.
Cool. So well, thanks again for coming on, Jessica. So the first thing we ask everyone is basically, can you give us a rundown of who you are and what it is that you do and how you serve the world?
Sure. So I started my career about almost 20 years ago now as a physical therapist, and I started in orthopedics and sports medicine, but pretty quickly within the first couple of years of practice, I began to specialize in women's health, and so focusing on pregnant women and women with pelvic pain and men and women with pelvic pain and incontinence issues. And I worked at a women's hospital, and I worked at a couple big teaching hospitals, and kind of the combination of women's health and manual therapy and orthopedics for women under certain circumstances, like female athletes and during pregnancy and postpartum. And then then I had my first daughter in 2003. And then shortly thereafter, I got pretty sick, but it was vague. I was constantly getting every cold and flu. I was extremely fatigued. I was having a lot of anxiety and panic attacks. And we had moved a lot because my husband was a consultant and I was working in a new job. And, my first week at the hospital, I just passed out on the floor and in the hospital. And it was a really stressful time because I didn't get many answers about my own health, even though I was working at a great hospital. I had been a practicing physical therapist already for quite some time. And But I just got a lot of answers like, oh, that's just how it is after you have a baby. You're just going to catch everything. You're going to be tired and it's all fine. Take this antidepressant, take some naps, you'll be fine. And I wasn't, and I was having terrible insomnia. So I was like swimming really hard every day and trying to work out more to get myself tired. And that just made everything worse. So finally, about 4 years, well, by the time my daughter was 4, so it took several years to really navigate this, I found a functional medicine physician who I had known in Houston and used to refer patients to her when I had lived there. And we moved back there for another one of my husband's jobs. And she showed me through some functional testing what kind of a hormonal crash I had, even though my pregnancy was perfectly fine, my delivery was perfectly fine, my baby was healthy. But my hormones were a mess. So I had to pretty radically change my nutrition and how I was taking care of myself, which was kind of strange because really, I wouldn't have said to you at the time that I was out of shape. I mean, I was a physical therapist. I'd exercised my whole life. I quote unquote ate healthy, but I had to really change everything. I was eating a lot of carbs and I was kind of like a pasta vegetarian, and it just really I had to make a pretty significant shift. And I had to learn a lot of that myself because this was before sort of formal education in functional medicine really existed. And my doctor was kind of fringe, but she had some ideas, but she didn't have the nutrition piece kind of down. So that's what led me down the path of going back to school and eventually getting my doctorate this year in clinical nutrition and kind of gelling the two together because I had to take some time off work because I was so sick. But once I was able to get back into the women's health physical therapy clinic, I started to bring these ideas because I thought, well, in pelvic pain, we often see hormonal imbalances. What if we started to integrate the manual therapy and the exercise with some nutrition and lifestyle medicine, I changed how I slept. I changed completely my relationship with stress. I had to really learn how to accept help and build community around me and support, especially now that I had a baby. And so I brought all of that wisdom into my physical therapy practice and found that it was really important, especially for my most challenging pelvic pain patients. And that sort of brought me to the practice that I ended up creating. I now run an institute called the Integrative Women's Health Institute, and I see patients virtually once a week. And the rest of the time, I teach professionals and do a lot of writing and speaking and that kind of thing.
Nice. Wow. That's quite a background.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's taken a while. It's been almost 20 years now.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I can definitely relate with, forgive the bad pun, but finding a career out of the need to scratch your own itch. So,
yeah,
absolutely. So what, God, there's so many different ways we could go with this.
Let's ask about having a kid, Brian, since that's something, you have, I don't want to call it a burden to have a child, but since
it's definitely not.
So you said your own health kind of fluctuated. What changes did you make to kind of get back on track?
Yeah. So after I had my daughter, during that time, and actually the whole time, my daughter that I had at that time, I have 2 girls now. My oldest, it was when that all happened, and she's 13 now. So for the last, decade and a half, we've moved a lot because my husband was a consultant. So I was like moving every year, and it was like, people were like, isn't that so stressful? And I'm like, no, it's fine. I'd always been kind of a type A person, and I didn't really feel or notice when things were stressful. So I had to start to sort of pay attention and give myself a practice around stress. I would, it was always like work out harder, But really, in order to heal my hormones, I had to work out a lot less. In fact, I had to take about 2 years off completely from exercise and then slowly get back in with yoga, restorative yoga, gentle movement. And now I can, definitely, I do strength training and I do relatively heavy weights. But for a couple of years, it was, tone down the intensity, really monitor it. And this is the question that I always say to my patients. After that workout, ask yourself this question: did I feel nourished or depleted? And you should feel nourished. And then a lot of times I would feel okay after, like right after the workout or during the workout. But 2 hours later, how do you feel? How do you feel the next morning? Because if you're feeling depleted, that's a really significant sign that you're essentially overtraining. What I had was my HPA axis, my stress buffering system was just tanked. And so I had to change my workout intensity. I had to go to bed and really kind of prioritize sleep and circadian rhythms. I had to get to bed by about 9 o'clock and have this kind of toning down sleep routine. I had to expose myself to daylight and less screens so that my circadian rhythm would get back on balance. And I had to eat a lot more protein and fat. So I would start the day instead of with like cereal or yogurt or whatever, I would, eat, for a while I was eating like sardines and kale. Like I was really trying to balance the morning with protein and vegetables. And now it's a little more moderate. Like I'll have collagen smoothies and some breakfast sausage. And so I eat like dinner for breakfast. I've sort of shifted that around, like a really solid breakfast. And for me, the nutrition shift was really to kind of a vegetable, like a plant-based paleo plan. That's not the case for what everyone needs, but for me, that was the nutrition plan that was really helpful to balance my blood sugar. And I didn't realize that my blood sugar had been kind of off for years. I was working in a hospital, so you have the lab coat, and I wouldn't be able to go anywhere without having like food and protein bars and stuff or granola bars or something in my lab coat. Like that was a big red flag that I didn't know about, that I couldn't go for like 2 hours without needing food. So that was a huge blood sugar issue that I had even before that. I just didn't realize it.
For sure. Now you mentioned collagen shakes. Now is that like the collagen powder that they sell online, or?
Yeah, just collagen, protein. That's the one that I find works best for me. There are some other good protein powders, but I like collagen because it doesn't really taste like anything. It's animal protein, so it's a little more solid in the morning, and you can mix it in smoothies.
Yeah. Which brand do you use?
I like Vital Proteins.
Okay.
It's my favorite.
Cool.
Do you find it makes like a big difference, or?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And just joint pain. Like I had for years in the clinic when I was doing manual therapy, my boss actually bought me these giant, like, those soft ice packs that we put on people's rotator cuff injuries.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I had like the big ice gloves for my hands, and I would wear them every afternoon, every night when I, would leave the clinic. And when I stopped essentially eating sugar entirely, I radically reduced the grains I was eating. I ate tons more vegetables, protein, and fat. My joint pain completely went away. And I think the collagen really helps that as well. When I'm doing heavier weights, if I have collagen protein on a regular basis, that's really supportive for my joints.
Absolutely. I use it on a semi-regular basis, and it's definitely good stuff. It's not a medication by any stretch, because supplements are not, but definitely a wonderful tool in the toolbox.
Well, and really it's a food, right? I mean, it's basically like eating bone broth, but a little bit simpler form.
Right,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I see that when people switch to like a more paleo, more like meat and veggies diet, their inflammation levels kind of drop, and even though they might have prior injuries, it's amazing to see how people say, "Oh wow, my wrist doesn't hurt anymore, or this doesn't hurt." It's amazing how our body is structured to kind of let us know if we're listening to it. That is.
Yeah, and I think that was the big thing that I personally had to learn at that time. having a baby, as you were starting to allude to, I think, was a huge change that, and I wasn't listening to how much rest and how much help that I needed, stepping into the role of being a new mom. I mean, it's very physical. You're like nursing all the time. You're awake all the time. My first daughter didn't sleep till she was like 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
I'll
tell you that makes me feel a whole hell of a lot better. I'm sorry for your struggles, but thank you.
Yeah. So, she's 13 now. So it does. Do you have a young baby at this point?
Yeah, she'll be 19 months next week. So.
Yeah. So you're still like in the complete fog.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I've ever left, but.
Brian's always been in a fog.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially after he has beans, then it's a different type of fog.
Jeez.
Right.
So, one of my questions, I'm going to speak for me and Claude. Claude, you can deny or verify.
Right.
We both tend to have a fondness of women, and being able to work with women and their issues, particularly pelvic issues and postpartum. What have you found as kind of the main things for helping women postpartum with, either basically rebuilding the pelvic floor and such?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I think the number one thing is that sort of mindset adjustment. So, when women become mothers, there is a big change that I think is very underappreciated and undersupported. It's like, how quickly can you get back in your skinny jeans? How quickly can you go back to work? I mean, I was at 10 weeks postpartum teaching mom and baby aerobics with my own kid. Like, that was crazy. You need to have some recovery. There needs to be this space where you're receiving a lot of support. And then in particular, the physiology of it, pelvic floor muscle exercises and really pelvic floor assessment. Oh my gosh, sorry about that. I don't know what that is. Ice cream man.
Right. Stay away from sugar, Claude.
Yeah, well, hey man, it's been like 4 or 5 days
Yikes.
now. I'm feeling pretty good.
Nice.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I don't even know what that is. We have some weird alarm in my office.
It's creepy as hell. If that comforts you at all.
What was
Sounds like the
that,
music when the clowns come to get you.
Yeah, what was that video game years ago with all the cars and it was crashing and there was the evil ice cream guy? Do you remember that, Claude?
Oh, was it Twisted Metal?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember his name. I didn't really play that one. I played Carmageddon. That one was pretty
Right.
cool. It was way more brutal though. Like there's people and you ran them over, and it probably explains a thing or two about me today. But
It may.
we're not here to talk about me.
Anyway, right.
Anyways, sorry about the crazy
Clown
interruption.
noises. It's okay. It's just a little
Um,
creepy. If you hear laughing though, then it's time to run outside and call the cops.
Right. Yeah, that's I don't see anything outside. I think we're okay. So anyway, so the pelvic floor requires, honestly, I think every woman postpartum, maybe not immediately at 6 weeks, but within the first 3 months should have a pelvic floor muscle assessment. Was there trauma? Was there any myofascial, tearing that hasn't fully healed, or stitching or episiotomy? How is her strength? Does she have any pain? How's her lubrication? Because there's so much that we can do. How's her abdominal stability? How's her fascial stability? I was working with a woman just the other day who was like 3 years postpartum, and she still has a pretty significant 4-finger diastasis at the umbilicus. And, she was trying to do boot camp exercises, and that's, okay, but we have to support that. We've got to make sure that she's got more deep core training going on, that she has that neuromuscular connection between her brain and her pelvic floor and her lower abdomen. And it's challenging to get back. I mean, my youngest is 6, and, it's hard, you have to have a concerted effort to kind of rebuild that stability in the pelvic floor and the lower abdomen. And that's assuming, I didn't have difficult births. I didn't have a C-section, nothing significant there. And then I think we also, from a biochemical standpoint, we have to nourish the tissues. So the woman, for sure, her brain, her sleep, but also the myofascial tissues, are they having collagen? Are they having, some of the most common internationally, women postpartum are fed all these various soups and fish bone soups and miso soups and bone broth soups. And we don't really have this kind of recovery space. Are we giving women enough protein? Are they able to digest it? A lot of what I do in my nutrition practice now is what you're eating is important, but if your digestive system is not functioning very well, you don't have enough stomach acid because maybe you've been on proton pump inhibitors for the last 2 years or more, or your digestive enzymes are low because you don't have a lot of energy, you have chronic fatigue, or you just had a baby, or you just had surgery. And so we need to be able to absorb things, lots of vegetables. Meanwhile, what we're doing is kind of bringing new moms like pizza and, cookies and stuff, which, is kind of comforting, but it's not going to nourish the tissues.
Yeah, I had not ever considered that, but yeah, that makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. Well, yeah, we'll make you a meal and bring you cookies and stuff, and yeah.
Yeah. And that's just like adding to the inflammation that they're already dealing with, especially when you pile that on top of, the stress of learning how to breastfeed, especially if they're a first time mom or the baby has any issues. And then lack of sleep, of course, is major.
Yes, I recall. So you didn't say this, but part of what I heard you say is probably 300 sit-ups a day for someone newly postpartum, probably not the best thing to do.
No, absolutely not. I mean, you have to just rebuild those deep core stabilizers. You've got to see if she's even, in any kind of neuromuscular connection to her abdominals and pelvic floor, because everything gets very overstretched, or sometimes it's tight and in spasm because she's kind of been guarding for, months.
Absolutely. Beautiful.
Brian, so I heard you mention sit-ups. So just for people out there in general, just as a tip, I would, especially if your posture is not great, I would try to err away from sit-ups. And just because, how do I put it? Not only do the upper abdominals already, they're not already tight from the sitting or standing in a bad posture, but also it can contribute, I think, to some hip flexor dysregulation. Would I be right there, Jessica, or am I?
Yeah, I don't think sit-ups are really a necessary exercise anyway. Certainly, moms have hip flexor tightness. Plus, they're going back to work pretty quickly and sitting all day. And then, much more I would be working on, breath work, fascial stability, and so specific exercises to address that, planks that are maybe on the knees, depending on a level of diastasis, pelvic floor muscle strengthening in various positions, whether it's bridging or squatting, depending on how strong or how much control she has, alternating, supine with a really stable core, and then alternating legs, arms, things like that, instability, or even just more full body functional training that you have to use your core with, but you're, closed chain with your legs, or maybe adding a little bit of weight, but it's more functionally stable.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talk about pelvic floor exercises. I'm familiar with the Kegels, and there is some, TVA and inner unit stuff that we can do. But is there anything that is your go-to for
Well, I think Kegels, but I think the important thing is to have someone who's doing a vaginal exam really assess if that woman's Kegling or, doing those pelvic floor muscle strengthening appropriately. Does she have that neuromuscular connection? Is the contraction equal on both sides? Is she fully relaxing the muscle? Does she have any hip weakness or things like that? So definitely, hip strengthening can be good, hip stability, balance. But then, like a really assessing the pelvic floor to make sure that it's contracting appropriately.
And I think that's where we refer out, Claude.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of people you can collaborate with, the pelvic floor experts.
Absolutely. So, and I hate to publicly claim not knowing things, but so,
That's okay.
It's always hard.
it is. So what I'm hearing you say is that really working on the TVA, the pelvic floor, all that is actually going to be what helps the
Diastasis.
Yes.
Yeah. So mini kind of head lifts. Yeah. So transverse abdominis strengthening, not overutilizing the obliques, especially at first, so that we're not sort of worsening the diastasis. And I think breathing and kind of functional movement is really important so that the woman has some understanding of when her diastasis is being strained and if it's causing any functional issues. Is she having leaking, is incontinence, is she having prolapse issues? If something is a minor diastasis and there are no functional lip issues, then I'm much less concerned, especially if she has body awareness. But that body awareness is very challenging postpartum because so much has changed in your alignment. And a lot of women, just lack body awareness in general. But you also, sometimes women gain weight and there's more abdominal fat, and it's hard to really tune into where are the muscles, how am I contracting, how am I becoming stable. So I think kind of skilled when you are working with a physical therapist, you can really kind of put their hands on the abdomen or do some taping to kind of just support for that proprioceptive reconnection. When I had my second daughter, I was on bed rest for 3 months and I gained like 50 pounds and I only weigh like 100 pounds. So to then like reconnect with all of that, you're like, wait, where you just feel really different when all of a sudden you're like, you have this massive belly and then you don't, and imagine if you had twins or something,
I can only imagine.
Same here.
Could you just real quick for our listening audience that doesn't know, kind of give a bit of a definition of the
Of the diastasis?
Yes, thank you.
So that's when like the rectus abdominis. So there's the muscles, kind of the six-pack looking abs get separated. Those muscles separate to create more space for the baby to grow. And it can separate right at the umbilicus, a little bit higher, a little bit lower, the whole thing. And so essentially what you get there is it's a fascial stretching, which again, why like adding, protein and collagen and vitamins. Collagen is built also with cofactors, like vitamin C, for example, is a big one, building that back up so that the fascia retains its stability. So for example, if you had a sprained ankle or something, you stretch that ligament, it's kind of the same thing with fascia. Once you overstretch it, it's a little challenging to regain the stability. So that's what the aim is.
And that's typically a vertical separation?
Yeah, well, it's so right at the umbilicus, it'll separate laterally, or we measure it at the umbilicus about 2 inches above and 2 inches below, and it's this kind of lateral separation so that the six-pack looks like there's kind of like a space in the middle.
Right. Okay. That's what I meant.
And in situations where the person's body fat percentage is low enough, it's actually pretty visible. It's like I guess if somebody's body fat percentage is higher, you got to dig in with your fingers, feel around. But like I've seen cases where it's just like, whoa, what is that gap? It's kind of to me it's startling at least.
Yeah, it can be. And especially again, if it's impacting functionally, and if you have like an athlete, they need that core stabilization. So, over exercising it at first is not ideal. We want to kind of focus on stability before we're putting heavier weights on it or more jumping or things like that, rotational movements.
I gotta say, Jessica, I'm really impressed with you. You've got the double whammy. You've got the physical therapy and the nutrition. It's quite an enviable position. I mean, obviously you worked hard, but it's like you've got a lot of the skills that people need. So
Thank
good
you.
on you. Yeah. Now, my question leading into that is, do you do any sort of spiritual stuff? Like, do you do any, I guess, chakra work or any Reiki, or is that kind of woo-woo?
Who am I to judge if it's woo-woo, right? But I don't really. I do coaching, which is more about kind of looking at obstacles to behavior change. So, and also mindfulness practices. So, mindfulness meditation, just breath work, things like that we know lowers stress and is kind of an easy tool for people to learn and use. But I don't really do like energy work or things like that. I certainly, have patients and I am open to things like that, but I have kind of an, evidence-based bent to how I work with people. And it's more about a very practical approach to, if you would like to get healthier, there are so many things that are really your responsibility, as the patient, as a clinician. There's only so much we can do, right? We can make recommendations. We can, assess for diastasis. We can see what's weak. We can, see what nutrients are missing. There's labs we can do to kind of look at the gut microbiome and stuff like that. But once we make these recommendations and kind of co-collaborate with our clients, they have to do the vast majority of the work. So, if there are things like, lack of support in their community, then I may have them go see a psychotherapist to support, a marriage relationship or something. Or if a lack of, needing to find just more people who are like on a healthy path, that they're not surrounded by a lot of people that are on a healthy path. Or if they just, need to be thinking about, well, what are the internal barriers? Like, where am I stopping myself because I don't feel valuable enough? Or I feel like, I have to take care of everybody else before I have time to take care of me. And that never happens, or I feel a lot of pressure, to achieve or something. So I do kind of work with people's emotional internal barriers, but not really in like an energetic work kind of way, more of coaching.
All right. Yeah, I think it's definitely very important that people have a good mindset and social support system. Now, if somebody doesn't have a very good social support network, what is your first step? Like, how do you help them? Because I've had situations where people kind of come to me and then all of a sudden they expect me to be 100% of their social support. So I'm like, what do I do? So I say like meetup groups, try to find like-minded people, but I don't have like a silver bullet, and I guess there isn't one, but I'm wondering what you do.
Yeah, that's a great question. I see that happening with a lot of, physical therapists and fitness professionals, because we are kind of with the patient, nutritionist, you're meeting with a person on a regular basis. So there's this sort of psych support component, social support component that's important, but we definitely have to learn to create boundaries. And so what I would suggest, I have this handout, which I'm happy to share with you guys, called the Web of Support. And it basically shows people, especially new moms or young moms, it's just some ideas about who to think about having in your network. Like, you want your network, you need, the research shows that if you have two supportive friends, and I would include a spouse, assuming that they're supportive, your health is dramatically better. So 2 people you feel like you can really share literally anything with. So look around, do you have one of those people? Do you have any of those people? Let's start with that. And then on a practical level, I recommend that we think of ourselves in big networks of community that don't have to always be super deep. Not everyone has to be a really close friend, but who do you have that is maybe a backup childcare, or someone who could pick your kids up, or helps out with if you kind of get in a food rut, who's the friend that makes interesting recipes and maybe you could invite to dinner, or who are in your surrounding you people that do enjoy exercise or yoga or whatever the kind of activity is that you chose to kind of put in on a regular basis, and to really think broadly and having a couple of people in each of those areas. So I have my patients create their healing team. So that would be the team of, physical therapist, fitness professional, physician, nutritionist, health coach, whatever. And then their home team, which is their family. And, are your kids on board, or is everyone whining about everything that you eat? Is your partner on board? What are ways we can swing that? Who are people you can surround yourself with who already are cool with that? And then, we talk about sometimes there are people in your life that are not supportive of your health. And then you have a couple of choices. You can just sort of be around them and just not deal with this issue when you're in their presence. Or, maybe these are people that you aren't that close with anyway. They're like drinking a lot, or, having you up, staying up too late or whatever. Then, maybe those are people that are not as supportive to bring with you into this next phase of your life.
And it's a hard decision, but sometimes that decision can change people's lives.
It can. Absolutely.
Absolutely. A question that came to mind, and I don't know if you have kind of an outline on how you do it, if you do, finding the balance between the stresses of having a social life and then having that social life with people that maybe aren't necessarily eating clean, for a lack of a better term, and going to cookouts and whatever, and eating the standard American fare. How do you kind of balance those?
How do I personally navigate that?
Yeah, or how would you recommend your clients?
Yeah, I think, well, in my experience, so when I was making these changes, because my husband will tell you the first meal I ever cooked for him was like burnt hot dogs and slice and bake chocolate chip cookies. So I did not, when I was a grad student in physical therapy, I did not know how to cook. I mean, I was eating, like I said, quote unquote healthy, in that I didn't eat fast food. I ate a lot of vegetables, but I didn't really know how to cook, and I wasn't around people who were big foodies or anything like that. In PT school, I got the peer pressure of like exercise, which was good, but I was always an exerciser, so that wasn't a big difference for me. But then when I shifted and I, started with, and what I do with my patients is we often start with this elimination diet. So that's an assessment tool that helps you figure out what's the best nutrition plan for you. So for me, that's kind of a plant-based paleo, but there are other clients I have who, are vegetarian or vegan for certain reasons, or some that need to eat ketogenic. It just depends on the patient more than the food. So it's, the question is, XYZ food healthy is kind of a dumb question. It's like saying, is rock climbing healthy? Well, that depends, Do
you fall?
Right.
Is driving healthy? It's like,
yeah.
The mileage may vary.
Right. So you have to know what it is for you in terms of your best kind of food plan. And then there are 2 ways that I deal with it, and I recommend my patients deal with it. One is to just find people that are more on this path. And now with, Facebook groups and, like you said, meetup groups, or even just like asking your friends, who likes to eat, who's interested in learning to cook more, or, likes to eat at these different kinds of restaurants. Or a lot of times you just kind of drive the conversation, right? So, whenever you say to your friends, oh, what should we do this weekend? And everyone's like, oh, I don't care, whatever. And you can say, all right, how about we go to XYZ restaurant, or come to my house and I'm going to make XYZ, and you bring a salad. And then some people are going to bring some things that you can't eat, but that's okay. You just sort of like let that go. And there's a shift to not feeling like, even if you're at a social event that has food, that you have to participate in the food part of it. So like for years, I've been dairy free because I have a dairy sensitivity that I learned about years before I really even got into this, but for like 17 years.
How did you discover that? Were there symptoms or?
Yeah, I had heartburn like literally every day for like 3 months. And I was on proton pump inhibitors. I had every scope. I had all this stuff and nothing helped. I had my husband like lifted the bed up. Like we did all that crazy stuff. And finally, when I originally went to see functional medicine, they were like, well, just try going gluten and dairy free. And I did. That was terribly difficult because at the time, all I was eating was pasta and yogurt. But I got over it. And I found that I was allergic to dairy. And ever since, I've had no issue. But so my mother-in-law, when I would go over to her house for dinner, she'd be like, I got you skim milk, like for years. I'm like,
man.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So,
It's a thought that counts.
Right.
it's right. And so, the way I navigate like eating at people's houses and things like that is I'll just like bring a big salad and just know that maybe I'll eat that, maybe I won't eat, and that is a big shift for people because I was working with a client just last week and she's like, well, I'm going to this wedding. And I'm like, well, you don't really have to eat there. You can just eat before. And, if there's a couple things you can eat them. And she was like, what? And I was like, well, that's the whole focus of a wedding is not necessarily the food, although in some families it can be. So that can be a big mindset shift too, that, you can go to social events and socialize and hang out with people. And, if you're at a backyard barbecue, go swimming or play with the kids or whatever. It's not always it doesn't have to be about the food. And yet there are often many ways that you can make the food situation easier. If you're at an event or you're at a restaurant, people are so much more aware of things like food allergies and things like that now that a lot of times if you just speak with the venue, there's something that you can eat. But it is a shift to going to an event for the food, to going to the event for the people and the event itself.
Yeah. And
It's a key distinction.
Yeah, and I think it's really that point where you said you can eat before the event. I recommended that to somebody the other day, and they kind of looked at me like, they're like, is that even legal? Like,
Claude, you have 3 heads.
Exactly. It's like, what is happening? Are you an alien? Like, so no, I said like it's fine, and then I freaked them out even more. I'm like, it's also fine to have dinner for breakfast. They're like, what? So it's like. Yeah. So just giving people options and after a while they kind of get it. They're like, oh man, I don't have to follow this kind of routine I've been forced into, and it doesn't change much. We get freaked out. We think, oh man, people are going to look at me weird. They're going to say, why aren't you eating? Why aren't you doing? Like, no, it's not actually that bad unless the people around you are really off the in
the matrix.
In the matrix, yes. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, most of the time, nobody says anything. They don't even notice. They're worried about their own stuff.
Yeah.
And if they do say anything, then, you're just, oh, I'm just doing this for health reasons. And then they let it go.
Yeah. I also like being an out. I say, if someone gives you a hard time, just say, listen, my coach told me that I have to do this, and he'll be very angry if I don't do this.
Yeah.
And I sound like the bad guy, but hey, that's fine. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got an appointment with them next week. I got to show up for that.
Can't screw up.
It's actually kind of brilliant.
I actually am kind of brilliant sometimes, Ryan.
That is true, Claude.
Thank you. Thank you.
Why we work together says somebody's got to have some brains.
I think, well, your name has brain in it if you rearrange like 2 letters.
That is true.
Yeah, there you go.
Anyways.
Anyway, yeah.
So
Jessica just disconnected.
Right. What is your current area of study? What are you geeking out on at the moment?
Well, I'm presenting my research in 2 weeks. So I've been doing a lot with looking at the connection between autoimmunity and pelvic pain, especially vulvodynia. And so that's
something I've not heard of.
Give me a definition of that?
Yeah, vulvodynia it's a common pelvic pain condition that's actually more like sexual pain. It's pain right at the vaginal entry, but it often overlaps with endometriosis or interstitial cystitis or things like that. It can happen postpartum. It can happen perimenopausally. Usually it's younger women. I don't usually see it for the first time perimenopause. It's usually younger, but it can be postpartum. And postpartum, what we did was we kind of biohacked this patient. What I often see with vulvodynia and other things that are kind of autoimmune pelvic pain, like interstitial cystitis, but you also see this with general autoimmune pain, like MS or sometimes rheumatoid arthritis, joint pain. So during pregnancy, there's this immune shift from Th1 immunity to a dominance of Th2 immunity, which basically means that there's a shift where there's more regulatory T cells which help to kind of quiet down inflammation. And that's done because that way the body's immune system won't attack the fetus. And so there's kind of this quieting of the immune function during pregnancy, and we often see these autoimmune pain conditions reduce. And so what we did in this case was we kind of took advantage of that, because normally we just sort of are like, yeah, you're lucky, enjoy these next few months because it's going to come like roaring back postpartum, right? So, and because usually like postpartum, thyroid autoimmune issues, lots of autoimmune diseases get worse or are triggered in the postpartum period. And so we just sort of like enjoyed the good time and then wait for the crash later. And so instead we did a lot of gut testing. So looked at her gut microbiome, looked at her digestive function, immune health, and really optimized her gut health, her immune health, lowered inflammation lowering diet. In this particular case, it was a kind of an autoimmune paleo plan. I did another case earlier that was a younger woman. She wasn't pregnant and she was vegan. So we did a very plant-based kind of high-fat vegan diet, or moderate fat, which worked well as well. And then, really optimizing digestive function. So stop feeding the bad gut bugs and, adding specific probiotics and a lot of fiber, making sure her stomach acid was good and digestive enzymes. And so really kind of supporting some pain that often is either worsened or triggered in the postpartum period by taking advantage of that quieting of the immune response and then optimizing the gut health.
I like it. It's how did, I mean, to me, I kind of see that they're somewhat connected, but how did you bring all of this about? Like, how did you decide to pursue this?
In this patient, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, we know that the gut and the immune system are very interconnected. About 80% of the immune system resides in the gut. And you have to optimize gut function. The small intestine is an important barrier. It's sort of like your skin. If pathogenic bacteria don't get in and viruses and other stuff don't get in through that barrier, then your immune system doesn't have to be reacting all the time. If food is appropriately digested and the nutrients are absorbed, but that's it, then again, the immune system doesn't have to be responding all the time. So we want the gut bacteria to be healthy. We want the gut barriers to be healthy. We want the stomach to be doing its job by digesting food and killing off pathogens with all that acid. We have such a problem with people with low stomach acid these days between proton pump inhibitors and just fatigue and stress. So we worked on all of those aspects: stress, the hormones, gut microbiome, the gut barriers, stomach acid, digestive enzymes, and then a really nourishing diet. And the immune system gets healthier, and the gut gets healthier, the gut function gets healthier. And then if you step right in postpartum and make sure this woman has some support and she's not overstressed, and she did have pelvic floor physical therapy pretty quickly postpartum just to make sure everything was still good. And so her pain, we followed up with her for 6 months postpartum, and normally the pain will come back at about 6 to 12 weeks, and it never returned.
That's amazing.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it was really cool.
And the body.
Go ahead, Claude. Sorry.
I was just gonna say the body's way that it can just heal and recuperate itself as long as all the ingredients are there is just it still amazes me to this day.
Really cool. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to say to our listening audience, I'm going to use kind of a blanket statement here, which there's always an exception to the rule. But generally speaking, if you have heartburn, it's actually generally a low amount of stomach acid, not too much. And so just be aware of that if you or a loved one suffers from heartburn or acid indigestion or GERD or whatever, all the different labels doctors tend to put on that today.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Yes.
It's pretty. What's the word? Not intuitive. It's counterintuitive. So it's like, oh, I've got too much stomach acid. This burns. Let me take more proton pump inhibitors or antacids or whatever. Yeah. So Jessica, how often have you come across that?
Oh, all the time. And proton pump inhibitors have only been tested for safety for about 16 weeks of use, and I've seen patients on them for 16 to 20 years.
Oh man.
They're supposed to be kind of a short-term fix while
like
I don't know what you're doing. Yeah, and I mean that's reasonable. Like if someone has severe heartburn and they need to kind of quiet that down while they're changing their diet, but to just like continue to eat like Philly cheesesteaks and take a bunch of proton pump inhibitors. Like,
God, that does sound good.
Wait, I've been doing it wrong all this time.
Crap.
I know. That's just a terrible idea.
Yeah, just wanted to get that out. So.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that too, Brian. That's funny.
But yeah, so Claude, anything else before we jump into our wrap-up questions?
No, I was just I had another question just on the holistic front, the holistic approach to helping people heal their gut and leaky gut and everything.
Yeah.
So what would you say, Jessica, would the like the top 2 or top 3 things be like? I mean, Brian and I kind of know already, but for somebody that's they're not feeling good, their digestion's off, they're tired, they might have a thyroid issue. What would the top 3 things that you recommend, like the kind of not quick fixes, but the things to look into?
The biggest bang for your buck.
Yeah, there you go. I like that.
Yeah, I think number 1 is stress. Take a look at your stress. Ideally, have your stress hormones measured. Consider what things might be triggering your stress, whether it's overtraining or, just relationship challenges or work challenges. The 3 common things I see are, relationship stress, work stress, and overtraining for athletes or even just people who are like stressed. And overtraining could also mean like working 16 hours a day and traveling across time zones all the time, things like that, or shift work. So stress is definitely number 1. Number 2 would be digestive function. So like we were saying, enough stomach acid, the gut barrier is working well. You don't have leaky gut. You have enough digestive enzymes, and you're eating an anti-inflammatory diet, not a pro-inflammatory diet. And then that 3rd thing would be optimizing the gut microbiome, which is a little bit of a shifty thing. Like we don't actually know how to optimize the gut microbiome exactly because we don't know what an optimal gut microbiome is, but we do know that diversity is good, fiber is good, sugar and processed grains and stress are not good. And so are also stressors could also be like chronic viruses like Epstein-Barr, Lyme, things like that, or just pain. People have chronic pain, chronic fatigue. So those are big ones. And the other thing I would say is there's a big epidemic of fatigue, which I think comes from 2 things. One is mitochondrial dysfunction, so not enough antioxidants. You're not getting your 10 servings of vegetables a day, or if you are, they're not being absorbed because your gut is all messed up. And 2, people just aren't sleeping. They're just on these devices and they're watching TV, and there's just no bedtime routine, and they're just like awake all the time with blue light exposure.
Well, I think that's a comprehensive list. Now, I find the stress part is some of the most difficult to manage because people kind of get used to it and they don't want to admit, at least to themselves, that they're stressed or that they can take it down a notch, or that there's something that can be done around the situation. So I find as soon as you kind of let them, take control of their own health and kind of show them that they're in charge, they're kind of more open to making changes. But like generally people feel like a passenger or a victim.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there has to be some vision for what they want out of their life and their stress. And then we definitely start talking about, okay, what are the resources you currently have? What are the resources you need? What is the support that you need? And then we start on a slow path. I mean, when I was really sick, I couldn't even really envision. I was just trying to like get out of bed and take care of my 3-4-year-old daughter. You need to start there with a lot of support. But then once you get a little bit of energy, the thing that I see what happens with my clients all the time is they use it right up. It's like, okay, I'm feeling a little bit better. So they like did 100 things that weekend, and I'm always
depleted themselves again.
Yeah. So I'm always talking about like, okay, you are at like a quarter tank right now or an eighth of a tank. We need to get you to 75% before you start using that energy, And so I think there's different ways to visualize it. I think, as you said, they have to feel like they're on a path, even if it's very slow changing and it's going to be a while before they reach the goal. Like, what is the goal? You're in charge here. How many things can you do? What's the alignment of their expectations? What can you do today to improve your health? And really just starting there with baby steps.
Yeah, I mean, the average person is walking around somewhere probably between about 20 and 40% vitality, which is just absolutely astonishing and not in a good way.
No, it's so true. And, you start thinking about, and I tell them the story of kind of what we did. I was really sick. We were living in North Carolina. I knew like we had a house in Texas that we had been renting out, and my husband got a job there, and I quit my job. We moved to this little tiny house. I did it because that's where the doctor was. Like sometimes you just have to like completely let go of things you think you need to restore your own physical ability. Then you can always get that stuff back.
Really good point.
It's so true. We've got to kind of give ourselves permission to help ourselves, and it may not be easy. Generally, it isn't because that it involves admitting a problem, and generally we don't like to think about problems. So yeah. But that is all I have for questions, Mr. Brian.
All right, beautiful. Well, let's jump right in. So, Jessica, if you had to rescue 3 books from a fire, what books would they be?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't actually rescue any books if there was a fire. I'd grab my 2 kids and go outside.
Fair enough.
But let's say there's a Yeti and he's going to come for your book collection, and you've got about 10 minutes to grab 3 books before he arrives and takes the rest of them.
Yeah.
What would you grab?
So I love books, and I think my favorites are, one is just fiction. One of the ways that I rehabbed my sleep was reading just relaxing fiction before I go to sleep almost every night. And there's an author named Beatrix Williams who I like. She's kind of historical fiction. So that's one thing I would have around. So wherever we land post-fire, we can recover. Post-Yeti, I can just relax and go to sleep.
See, I'm doing the opposite right now. I'm reading a book called Heart-Shaped Box by a guy named Joe Hill. And he's actually the son of Stephen King.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
So I'm reading this at night, and I'm like, this can't be good for me.
No, I wonder why you're not sleeping well.
Yes. Oh, that's probably not the best. And then I like, I like to be inspired. And so I like things like Big Magic from, I believe it was Brene Brown who wrote that. Okay. Christian Northrup's books were really, I think, a huge shift in how we think about women's health. She was willing to start looking at, how we take care of women. We have to stop victimizing them. We have to really shift them into feeling like they have ownership of their health and making sure that they actually do. And so those are some other books that really inspire me.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
All right. What purchase under $100 has most benefited you personally or your practice?
Under $100. I would say anything that, like, I have a little studio in my office, so I can do Facebook Live videos.
Mm-hmm.
And so I bought this giant whiteboard, which is really valuable. It might have been a little more than $100, but this way I can write and teach on Facebook Live. And on times when my kids are home and I have to record things like this or be on like a radio show or something, they will draw on it quietly.
Yeah, all right. I'm going to get one of those.
Yeah.
Well,
So that's been valuable.
I think there's actually, it's like a wallpaper thing you can put up now, and you can just make the whole wall like a chalkboard or like a scribble board. It's pretty nuts. You should get that, Brian. Just have your house outfitted with those.
Yeah, using the blackboard paint.
Yeah, and then that way you can just write all your thoughts and notes on it. But if anyone ever visited, they'd probably think you're like a serial killer or something, just writing all over the walls.
I don't know about serial killer, but psychopath maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows?
So,
There you go.
yeah, and on that note, who is the first person that comes to mind, or what is your definition of the optimum human?
I think the optimum human, I don't have one person, but I have the idea that they are living in alignment with their purpose, with their happiness. And they're doing it in such a way that they're not functioning at 20%, that they're functioning at least 75%. So they actually are giving from a place of health, not from a place of depletion.
Cool. I dig it and agree with that.
You better.
And who would you want to hear on this podcast, if anybody, or maybe just shut us down? And what would you want to ask them or hear them talk about?
Well, I suggest that you interview my friend Jenny Burrell, if you haven't already.
We have not.
She's probably as close to the optimal human in terms of constantly doing the work to get there. She's a fitness instructor and she works with women postpartum and teaches professionals. And she she's almost 50. She moved from a city lifestyle and she's just very motivating, inspiring. She does her own work all the time and she's really fun.
Perfect. And where can our listening audience find out more about you and get your free training?
Our website is integrativewomenshealthinstitute.com, and there are professional resources, there are community or public education resources, and you'll find it all there.
All right, beautiful. And any social media to shout out?
Yeah, probably the best place to follow me is Facebook. That's where I'm most consistent, and it's facebook.com/integrative pelvic health, or on Instagram at Integrative Women's Health or Jess R. Drummond.
Beautiful. And any final thoughts, asks, suggestions to our listening audience?
I think if your goal is to be an optimum human, the first thing to do is define what that means for yourself so that you're doing it for yourself and your purpose rather than what you think it should be.
Wow.
Yeah, that's funny, Brian. I just wrote a status similar in a similar vein to that today. I wrote, "Don't let anyone else define you," or something along those lines. But no, it's very important to choose your own direction. Now, Jessica, a quick question before we take off. Your website, have you ever looked at getting like a shorter link, like the IWHI.org or something?
I have, yes. IWHI.com is owned by someone, and they are sitting on it. Eventually will do that, but I just haven't worked on it. But yes, that's something that would be a good idea.
Yeah, even getting like a .net.org, just because people, even I mean, it's pretty straightforward. If they know what they're looking for, they can go to it. But people nowadays with this social media generation, like I'm scared to type sentences longer than 4 words now. So it's
I know, it's true. I have a 13-year-old and it's so crazy. Like her phone is sort of an extension of her hand, I think.
oh yeah, and brain.
Yes. Yeah.
It's an interesting world that we live in these days.
Absolutely. Yeah. But that's a good tip. I definitely have considered that many times.
Cool. Well, Jessica, thank you so much. This has been amazing. Just full of wisdom. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. And I just want to give a shout out to one of our listeners, Nicole. She gave me shit for talking about tequila too much on the podcast, and I haven't mentioned it in a few things. So yeah, I think I'm going to get some tequila this weekend and Patron, 100% agave. Is that cool, Jess?
I can give you my margarita recipe.
Oh,
it's as paleo as you can have when
is
it
it
comes
like a
to tequila.
NorCal margarita?
Well, here's what we do. So you have to have good tequila, and then you squeeze, I think it's 3 limes to 1 orange. And so it's fresh juice, and the orange gives you that little flavor without any sugar. And so you have fresh orange juice combined with fresh lime juice, tequila, and ice, and you're good to go.
Oh my God, I
Thank
want to
you.
try that this afternoon.
As if the wisdom couldn't keep coming.
Well, Jessica, thank you for that. I think to me that's the biggest thing I've gained off of this podcast.
Oh, jeez.
I do love my adult beverages.
Well, good. Enjoy.
All right, guys. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jessica, for holding on to this roller coaster, both on the ups and the downs. And we'll catch everyone next week. Bye, guys.
Bye now.
Thanks for listening to the Optimum Human Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to head on over to iTunes and give a 5-star rating and review, which will help spread the word to more awesome listeners just like you. Head on over to theoptimumhuman.com and subscribe to the free newsletter and get the Optimum Humans Blueprint to the Optimum Life. Download it instantly. Thanks for listening.